I'm working on him. He's almost done. Look, please. I'm so close to finishing him. Look. He is being worked on. He is here. He's just taking a while. Please. With that out the way, hello and welcome to another Marvel Legends figure review type thing. So this is the VHS 2-pack that recently released of Spider-Man and Vulture, evidently. And the packaging's pretty good. I don't normally manage to fit the packaging on my filming setup, but for once it fits. And I quite like the plastic-free packaging. However, I do completely understand why people didn't like it. They can get away with quality control issues that you don't know until you've bought the figure. I personally quite like the slim, less waste for the packaging for this figure, or these two figures. Now, immediately you're going to notice that Spider-Man looks strange. For whatever reason, they've gone back to using, I think it's a modified Sunfire body mold. And yeah, it's great that it's pinless, but it's not got as much articulation as Vulture has, if you ignore the butterfly joints that he's got. The Vulture has more range, which we'll touch on later. So getting into Vulture first, I actually really like the look of this figure. I think this is the better figure of the 2-pack, which, you know, if you've got Spider-Man and a villain, you're not normally going to have the villain be the better part. But you can see there you've got good crunch forwards and back. Considering he's got a mullet under that mask, very good head range backwards. The hair's like on a flexi piece, so it moves out of the way. Looks down very far as well. Obviously full rotation, and you do get some good tilt. So they've done a really good job of this figure with the fact that he's meant to be flying and have some agility to him. Now the shoulder pads are also on a flexi attachment, so you can get them pretty high and out of the way. You could in theory do a full rotation, but there's a chance you'll tear the flexi plastic that's underneath, so I'm not going to risk breaking it. Especially since having it arrive, I don't intend on keeping this. I sold this nearly immediately after I'd reviewed it. Now you can see the elbow joints. You get a good range there as well, which is great considering that's where his wings attach. You also get the swivel hidden under that belt there. A good range up, which is important to note. A good range out, again, also important to note. Then the swivel hidden under the strap on his leg. You've also got the double jointed knees as well there. Both these figures are completely pinless, which is very nice to see. And you've got really good range there as well. So the only articulation points that are missing on this figure compared to the Spider-Man are the boot cut and the butterfly joint. If he had both of those, I genuinely think this figure would be more articulated than the Spider-Man figure is. So bringing Spider-Man back in, again, those gaps in the shoulders are awful. I don't know how we've gone back to this. It's kind of like they fixed it immediately after people hammered home how bad it was, and now we've got it back again. There was a good few bodies that didn't have this gap, and yet we're seeing bodies with it back again. But you can see you do get some good range out of that gap, I suppose. But you know, you cause paint rub anyway. Now that's as far forward as this figure will crunch, which if we compare it to the Vulture does have a little bit more range there. Not a whole lot, but considering this figure's taller and their heads are almost at the same level, it means he's got more crunch to him. Now I forget to show it, but he does also have a lot more going back than the Spider-Man figure does. I think this is a very weak release of a Spider-Man figure for Hasbro. The head looks up really well. Obviously looks down really well as well. You do also have the full rotation in there. Now this is as far as I want to lift the arm in a way that won't cause paint rub. So you can get 90 degrees out. Obviously full 360 rotation there as well. The articulation kind of speaks for itself. It's kind of got standard Marvel Legends articulation, which you shouldn't have for a Spider-Man figure. I mean, the leg doesn't go out as far as the Vulture does either. bearing in mind that the Vulture's other leg is further in as well. You shouldn't have what in the comics is an old man with a wingsuit being able to hit better poses than the Spider-Man character. Now, of course, the rest of the articulation is pretty good. Like, the standard pinless double joints work the way standard pinless double joints do. You do have a boot cut, which is nice. The ankle articulation on this guy is really good. No toe hinge. What? How are we back to Spider-Man not having toe hinge? But the accessories are probably where people are going to be getting this figure for. So, obviously this is what comes with Vulture. If I were to keep this figure, I'd probably display it with this head because it should go in my comic collection. And that is a very nice head sculpt. And these wings are done really nicely. I know they're just the standard wings that Hasbro have been using for quite a while now. But the pearlescent blue in this just looks pretty nice. And now this is the Flash Thompson head that came with this figure. This is the only way I can accept that this is a reasonable articulation for this figure, is if it's Flash and not Spider-Man. But then you get a Peter Parker head sculpt with it anyway. So, is this meant to be Peter Parker? Because it's definitely not got the articulation for it. And then, just to add insult to injury, you don't get wall crawling hands, which are kind of like a solid piece of Spider-Man figures. Also, the wrist pegs are different for some reason. They're just shorter. So it's a new hand by the looks of it, or a new hand that's been done for Spider-Man. Now this is probably the best part of this release, is this mask. The problem is the hands they released with it don't hold the mask properly. But before we get into that, here's a quick look at Vulture, obviously with his wings and how most people have him posed up. And he does look good. He looks very good in a flying pose. He works exactly as Vulture should. So props to Hasbro for the Vulture figure. Yes, this is good. This is good Marvel Legends. This, however, is strange. The way he has to hold the mask kind of makes it look like a piece of plastic, which of course it is. But the aim is to not do that. Like, it just looks like a flat piece of plastic. There's not enough flowing to it, really. For the hand they've released, this should have more curve to the mask. Rather than just being a straight piece with a little curved bit at the top. And no matter how you have him hold it, there's always going to be a gap in the hand, so it doesn't look like he's holding it tightly. It looks like it should be held by the little bit at the top, but he can't because it's too small to fit in such a big grip. Like, these are maybe the best kind of poses you can get him with the mask, is where there's somewhat of action going on, so it looks like it's being windswept. It's just very rigid. And of course it's rigid, it's plastic, but like, it looks rigid. So many companies have managed to make mask holding hands look like fabric. I'd go as far as to say the custom ones that I've done actually look like they're holding a bit of fabric. It also just doesn't hold very well. I'm a bit disappointed with this. Yeah, it's not a great design, I don't think. The sculpt of the mask itself is great. The sculpt of the hand is great. If they're meant for each other, they do not work at all. You need a different hand to hold this mask, or the mask needs to be different to fit that hand. It's kind of like they had two different designers working on these parts. Like, you can see from any angle other than straight on, that mask looks strange. But there was Vulture with his ultimate head. I think it looks great. It does seat a little bit higher than I thought it would. It kind of looks like his neck's longer than the other one. But a great look anyway. I mean, it kind of works for Vulture. See, now this would work. But then the slightest bump and it'll fall off. What I did find is that if you take this hand and you replace it with the one that came with the Amazing Fantasy Spider-Man, which obviously already exists, they already had the mold for this, it's already been used for Spider-Man, it has a tighter grip. It's got that small hole that's almost perfectly designed for the little flap on the top of that mask. And if you get it seated right, it looks so much more realistic. I don't know why they used a new hand. Just use this one. The one you've already been releasing the Spider-Man figures. This was the correct choice. I feel like I'm giving a lot of hate to this figure, but it doesn't work as Peter Parker Spider-Man. And while the mask is great, it doesn't work with that hand. I don't know quite what Hasbro were thinking with this Spider-Man release. Works great as Flash Thompson, if you want to do an unmasking scene of like the imposter kind of style thing that always happens. Great. But if that was the idea, it should have only been released with Flash Thompson. It should have been advertised as the Flash Thompson Spider-Man, or Imposter Spider-Man, or something. I mean, comparing it to these other releases that they've done, it really doesn't compare. All these other ones are better, even the retro suit. The retro suit, personally, is one of my favourites. The articulation is just really fluid on it. The only issue I have is the lack of pinless and the lack of toes. But that was released before they were properly doing it. These two are probably the closest in like shape and size. In fact, the design is nearly identical. The only issue is the head's a little big when you do a head swap. But either this body or the Renew Your Vows body with the correct colour scheme would have been perfect. And both of those come with wall crawling hands. I'm a little bit confused because they've now got 3 different body molds for the 90s animated series Spider-Man. They've used the Amazing Fantasy, they've used the Renew Your Vows, and then they've gone to the Sunfire body mold for some reason. And look, toe articulation. It's just strange to use a whole different body mold for a character they've already got body molds for that were working really well. And yeah, if you've got this figure, the head sculpt does fit. It's slightly loose, which is weird because the Peter Parker head on this body is a perfect fit. I think a bit of hot water might reset it. But yeah, it's one of their weakest Spider-Man releases. This, to me, is the perfect Spider-Man. And if you take the effect parts from the new one, you kind of get the ideal Spider-Man. You take that holding hand from the Amazing Fantasy Spider-Man, the mask from this new release, and you get a really cool Spider-Man that can hit some really fun poses. I also personally just prefer this style of Peter Parker head. Like, the mask just looks so much more natural in that hand. And I think a lot of my issues with the new release would have been fixed if they just released it with this hand. But let me know what you guys think. I know this has been quite negative, but I'll see you in a more positive video soon.